Well, hey there, it's that coding guy here, breaking it down and making it accessible. Let's talk more about tests. In my previous video, I broke down the different types of tests and compared and contrasted and talked a little bit about each of the types of tests, and these were covered. So if you missed that, go check that out. I'll throw the link up there. Otherwise, let's dig into the test pyramid. I feel like the test pyramid is fairly iconic, and it's a good reference to use when talking about tests and thinking about tests. Let's talk about the foundation of the pyramid. And I'm going to use this caveat with the fact that your team, whatever you're doing, they may not be using unit tests or integration tests or end-to-end tests. So I'm really talking about these in general. Unit tests really focus on isolation of one unit under test. And because of that, there's no outside dependencies for these tests. So they run very quickly. They run as fast as your machine can handle processing through the code. So typically you can run 1,000 of these tests in a couple of seconds. They're very fast. They do tend to be a little brittle. And if your team is writing unit tests, there tend to be a lot of them because we have lots of units. We have lots of methods throughout all of our code. So there are numerous unit tests and they run very quickly. Integration tests, in that previous video we talked about integration tests being an overloaded term. They can mean different things to different folks on different teams. But typically, they will involve the integration of one or more units, and that can involve things like databases and making external calls to external services. And because of that, those things take time. So these tests are longer running than the unit tests. So they take longer to run, and there will be fewer of them because there's less integrations between units than there are units. And so that's why the integration tests are the middle tier of the pyramid. And at the top, we've got E2E, or end-to-end tests. This is commonly referred to as browser automation if your project has a UI and a browser. But otherwise, so these are thought of to go from one end of the system to the other end of the system. So there's lots of ground to cover there, lots of time to take. Browser automation in particular is very slow because the application has to render to the UI, and the script has to navigate through the UI, perhaps going to different pages and filling out forms and clicking on things and waiting for it to go full slice through the application and come back and re-render or change the view somehow. So these can be very long running. It may take several minutes for one of these tests to run depending on the particular business scenario and the application under test. And because these really focus on critical paths through the application and really precise use cases, there's fewer of them to cover what we actually need to do. So typically, of all of the types of tests, there will be the fewest end-to-end tests, and they are the longest running. So at the foundation, we've got the unit tests, very quick, and there's a lot of them. There's less integration tests, but they take a little longer. And there's the fewest end-to-end tests, and they take the longest. So as I said, this is kind of an iconic concept when you're talking about testing and software. You could Google up testing pyramid and find several different versions of this and articles that will go through this stuff as well. So hopefully that helps in your journey on understanding testing and software. Cheers.